Everyone, we should call the meeting of the Delaware County Fish and Game Commission to order. Can we have a roll call, please?
Chairman Rob Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Jaytuck Steinruck, Commissioner Kendall Smith, Commissioner Helen Ferguson, Commissioner Job Silva, Commissioner Steve Avila, Commissioner Sherman Jackson,
Here.
Commissioner Sal Hernandez,
Here.
Commissioner Thomas Mitchell.
Here. By golly, we have a quorum. That's a good thing. So we have the pleasure this evening of having quite a few folks that came from Sacramento, from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and some folks from Eureka that came to make a presentation to us, and then we're going to have some discussion about elk. And we'll have the public comment period after they make their presentation. And so I believe it'd be nice, I think, maybe if each person who came from Sacramento could stand up to the mic and introduce themselves and tell us what your actual job is in Sacramento and in Redding. Jeff? So, one at a time is fine. And maybe only one of you could introduce all of them. I don't know.
I'll let these folks speak for themselves. Good evening, members, public. My name is Chad Dibble. I am the Deputy Director for the Wildlife and Fisheries Division. I am headquartered out of Sacramento. I oversee several of our branches that handle anything from wildlife lands, the lands that we manage, our hatcheries, our fisheries, our hunting regulations. I work through aquaculture. I work on nutria and beaver, and I also work on our regulations. So several branches underneath me. I'm happy to be here today. It was a great tour that we had earlier, so thank you again for the hospitality of showing us around the town and to some of the issues we're going to talk about tonight. I'm very appreciative of it. I've had conversations with many of you over the last 18 months or so that we've been discussing some of these issues, and so I'm just happy to be here tonight, and we're open to have some conversation, and I speak on behalf of the director and the department that we're here to listen, we're here to participate, and we're trying to find some resolution. And I think today's presentations will be pretty informative to you all, as well as some of the members in the audience, of what we've been trying to do and where I think we can go, and some of the solutions that if we can work together, we can try to tackle this issue that you all are facing. So I appreciate the time.
Thank you. Next.
Hey everybody, thanks for having us today. My name is Kevin Thomas. I'm the Deputy Director for our regional operations. Little distinction between me and Chad. Chad oversees our statewide wildlife branch that kind of looks at the rules and regulations, policies, deals with the commission. I oversee our 7 regions. Region 1 is your region up here. So we implement everything on the ground. So Jeff and Carrington and all those folks work in my branch under the regions. Just looking forward to the discussion today, open to hear what everyone has to say, and hoping to walk out of here with some solutions for everybody. So thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. I am Scott Gardner, and I'm the Wildlife Branch Chief that Chad and Kevin described, I think, pretty well our organization. We're a branch that has statewide responsibility and what it sounds like, and really wildlife issues. We have 4 major programs in our branch. We have our game and connectivity program, and our manager of that's going to introduce himself is here today. We also manage our lands statewide. We have our wildlife health lab, and we also have the wildlife diversity program. And we're statewide policy, and we manage several of our budgets and that sort of thing as well. So thank you for having me, by the way.
Certainly. Thank you for coming, sir.
Thank you very much for having us here today. My name is Mario Klipp. I am the program manager for game conservation and wildlife connectivity. It's also a statewide program. Within game, there's upland, waterfowl, and then of course we have big game, including elk, which is why we're here today. But it also includes bear and deer and various other species that of course many people have opinions about as well. And one of the newer programs that we just started last year is our connectivity project program, which is really about making sure that we do something about linear infrastructure and how animals are able to get across from one point to another without getting smooshed on highways, railroads, etc.
Good evening, Jeff Stoddard. I know many of you know me, but I'm the Northern Region, so Region 1 Land and Wildlife Program Manager. So I'm responsible for coordinating and working with our staff that are doing a lot of these programs with the branch, but in Region 1, so the 9 northern counties. And so it's all lands that we manage, and then wildlife species, including non-hunted and hunted species.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Freeze. I'm the Northern Region Wildlife and Lands Program Supervisor. I manage the Mendocino and Humboldt Del Norte coastal units for Wildlife and Lands Program. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Carrington Helson. I am the elk research biologist for our coastal counties, so Del Norte, Humboldt, and Mendocino.
Your compadre? She want to introduce herself? No, maybe not.
Sure. So that's April Shipley Mellon. She is one of our ES interns working on the elk project here on the coast.
And they darted and tagged some elk this morning, so they actually did some work before we interrupted their day at around 1:15 and went on a little tour today. So we toured, so folks know, starting down clear on south of town and around Casino, Elk Valley Casino, up and around Elk Valley Road, Kings Valley Road, Lake Earl Drive, Lower Lake, all the way around up to north of Gilbert Creek. And so they had a tour of the land and kind of have a little idea, although it was relatively fast, but have a little bit of an idea about, some of the folks had never been here before. Certainly some of the folks have heard from various people about the problems and issues and so forth with elk. And so we invited them up here to come. They're gracious enough to come. Carrington's going to make a presentation of things going on, and then we'll have a contact or a discussion period of time for folks to ask some questions. Carrington. Those of you also who don't know, most of you do, but that we had about 2 hours, maybe just slightly less than 2 hours, talking to share property owners in the county at Fort Dick Grange. And so there's been a pretty good, lively discussion already about some issues around. But here we go.
That worked. Okay, so as I said earlier, I'm Carrington Hilson, the elk research biologist for Region 1, focusing on our coastal counties. My name is the only one up there because I'm the only one standing here right now. But my work, I just want to say thank you to everyone up here for their help and support in the research that we've done and the data we've collected. I also want to thank, the department for being the backbone for getting all this work done as well. So, elk in California. So, we have 3 subspecies of elk, right? Roosevelt, Tule, Rocky Mountain. We only care about Roosevelt's up here. But one interesting thing to note is that elk were almost extirpated from the state in the early 1900s. So Tule elk were only down to a handful of individuals down in Southern California, and our current estimate for Roosevelt elk was only 100 to 200 individuals, so remaining in remnant populations. So since the early 1900s, we've seen this massive range expansion of these elk. I always find this rather amusing. So back in early 1900, when we really didn't have elk around, it was actually a felony to kill an elk, up to 2 years imprisonment. So we've come a long way since then. So really what I want to talk about today are these management objectives. So we have these populations of elk that have dramatically expanded. And if it was a different species, if it was something that didn't bulldoze its way across the environment, we would look at this as a conservation success story. Unfortunately, that's not the case with these elk. So we have several management objectives that we're really looking to tackle on the ground and for us to discuss in this presentation. So we want to reduce conflict. This is not limited to just urban and agricultural areas. Elk cause conflict in everywhere that they exist. We want to provide more hunting opportunity. And this is also a way to hopefully reduce some of our populations. We want to reduce transmission, so this is specifically associated with treponine-associated hoof disease, which I'll get to later. And then we want to increase suitable habitat. And so it kind of goes against what I've just said in the fact that we want to reduce populations and deal with conflict, but we need, as a wildlife agency, to support range expansion and have elk where they're welcome on the landscape. So that would include our PLMs, our tribal lands, and our public lands. So, hunting. So we want to provide hunting opportunity. And we have done a lot to increase tags on the North Coast in the past decade. So currently, we have our public tags, and so that's split between two different tag types. So we have our general tags and our share tags. And then we also have our cooperative elk hunting tags. So those are specific to landowners. So this goes into what Mario was talking about earlier, in the fact that we increased our share tag allotments, but we were unable to get them all allocated. In addition to increasing our landowner tag capacity, and once again, unable to get all of those issued last year. So when you look at the difference between what we had available and what we allocated, we're looking at an additional 70 tags that could have been issued last year if we had had the time and the contracts hadn't already been in place for the share hunts. So the landowner tags, so we increased the number of tags available, but we also increased the number of eligible properties. So originally it was 640 acres. We dropped that acreage requirement down to 60 acres. So this map is showing the qualifying properties within Del Norte County. So the increase in the landowner tags, so now it is a 1-to-1 ratio for our cow tags or antlerless category, but it is not to exceed 20% for our bull tags. So let's see. So in 2024, this is the number that was asked earlier, we did not issue 41 of these tags, and 5 bull and 18 corresponding landowner tags were also not issued. So hopefully this coming year we'll have the capacity to issue the more share tags and have enough landowner enrollment that we get these tags out. So we want to increase harvest. So share hunts are our main mechanism to do this. So we are increasing, hopefully, through a regulation change currently, the share season to be year-round to deal with conflict on the ground. So our current season, we actually runs from August through the end of January, but we normally end our hunts at the end of December. And so what we're hoping for is the capacity to harvest elk outside this season in order to deal with conflict. So the process for which we make these changes takes some time. So it's almost an entire year from the start of regulation change to when it is in place. So we start with the Wildlife Resource Committee meetings. It goes on to the Fish and Game Commission and a public notice. Then we have documents that the department needs to supply, and followed by an additional meeting, and then the potential for adoption by the Fish and Game Commission. So last year, when we were able to increase those share tag allotments, it took an entire year to get that through. And now we're finally able to issue those tags. So how can landowners help us? How can we get these share tags allocated? So basically, it's having more participation from private property owners to allow public access and to allow for the harvest and take of elk on their lands. So I said, we've come a long way, right, since early 1900s, but we've also come a long way since 2016. So that was the first time we had share hunts up in Del Norte County. And since then, we've been through several rounds of regulation change that have allowed for increased hunt opportunity. So we did that first increase in 2019. Then we increased again in 2020, and then again in 2023, and then 2024. And so this past year this current round of regulation change was the first time we haven't added tags, but we're hoping to just extend the season. So we're constantly trying to do things to better address the conflict. So this gives you kind of a picture of our hunts over time. And this is for all of the elk management units, so Del Norte and Humboldt counties. So it used to be that the majority of Green Diamond was all in the general hunt program. So we had separate hunts on Green Diamond property. Those properties went into the PLM program, and share properties got enrolled to offer public opportunity. And so over the years, we've tried to increase that public opportunity and landowner opportunity. And so you can see there the number of share, general, and landowner tags have been increasing through time. So, conflict. The department's toolbox currently for managing conflict really consists of allocating tags and putting hunting pressure on these elk. We've tried some other things. So we had our unit biologist out here attempting to paintball elk to identify individuals. We've tried cameras, we've done surveys, we've recommended hazing. And I know with highly habituated elk, you can only do so much. They really don't move. And we did have the capacity to move cattle this past year out of conflict area, and that actually worked. But that's not a solution that's long-term, and it's not a solution for everyone. So we do have our grazing lease for Lake Earl Wildlife Area will be initiated this year. But we need to do a little more to address urban conflict. So the map here shows our elk herds. And then the numbers that I'm showing are the minimum count data, so just the elk that I counted, not necessarily the elk that are on the landscape, but the ones that I counted since 2016. And so you can see there's a little bit of fluctuation on an annual basis between these counts, and some herds are continuing to grow, others have come down and then back up. But when you look at everybody together, so all the elk within this area, within Del Norte County, excluding the ones down south of us on Wilson, the population hasn't changed a ton. So we had 366 elk in 2019 and 484 last year was the minimum count that we got. Even with the increase in tags specific to share properties within Del Norte County. So one thing that has really started to drive the number of share tags and how we look at this is density of elk. So we have the collars on the elk, so I know where they are, and I know the amount of area that they utilize. And if you look at literature, anything over 1.5 is considered high density. So here, it's a mix, but a lot of our high density herds are up here in Crescent City. So density plays a role in some other things, such as disease transmission. So we do test all of our elk that we capture. We look at serology. So I take blood samples, we send them off to the lab. We have tested for Johne's disease. It's negative. Brucella's negative. We have had some positive samples, just that there was a titer, so the animals have been exposed to anaplasma, as well as, what is the other one that we have some positives for? Is it deer adenovirus? Sorry, our vet made this slide for us. So nothing too surprising there, and then the majority of our cattle-related diseases are absent from our elk populations. And we do test for selenium because a lot of times that has a lot to do with our herd health. So we know that treponine-associated hoof disease, or TAD, is density dependent, and so that's where this whole idea of density comes into play. So for those of you that aren't familiar, TAD is a multifactorial and polymicrobial disease. So it is multiple bacteria that are setting up in these elk hooves, and it is also reliant on multiple factors in the landscape. So it's not just the bacteria that's causing it. High density, wet substrate, and there's possibly a genetic component related to this disease. So there's multiple things going on here that's allowing for this disease to set up in our elk populations. We first confirmed this disease in 2020 from elk harvested actually the winter of 2019. The majority of the herds within Del Norte County and a lot of them down into Humboldt County are all positive for the disease. Currently, there is no data to support that this disease is transmitted to or from cattle. And we are not, doing anything with livestock. That's all on USDA. We are working collaboratively with Washington State University to examine and understand more about this disease because we don't know a ton. So in regards to management, we do want to decrease the density of these populations where we do have TAD because that will decrease the level of transmission from infected individuals. So if we decrease density and we decrease transmission, we're going to inevitably decrease prevalence or the number of elk that are positive for TAD. And this also, at the end of the day, increases animal welfare. So I don't think anybody likes to see animals suffer, and this disease is absolutely debilitating. And so basically they get to the point where the lesions undermine the entire hoof capsule, the hoof will slough off, and basically the animal will lie down and starve to death. This disease is not easy for one other reason. Diagnostic testing is not simple. It's not like we can do a COVID swab and test in our kitchen to figure out what's going on. Currently, the only way that we can say that something is positive is by having a dead animal. So I need the hooves in hand. So those samples get two different types. So I look at it, I say, yes, it looks like TAD. I cut samples, and then the lab does actually 3 rounds of testing. They'll look at it under a microscope, they'll do staining, and then a third confirmatory test to say that it is TAD. And so with all of that going on, we have so few pathologists that deal with wildlife that we're a little behind. But this is the flow chart that goes through my brain whenever I get a sample, a hoof in the lab. So when a herd is confirmed positive by the lab, when I get feet that are grossly abnormal, I can call them positive. But I can't say anything about the ones with lesser lesions. So to give you an idea, here's what we've been doing. Since we found that first positive case, we've requested samples from hunter-harvested elk. We've gotten them opportunistically, in addition to TAD lethal removal. So we have our game wardens out there facilitating euthanizing these elk, and the carcasses are getting transferred over for tribal use. So to date, we've had 142 that we've lethally removed. That is between the two counties, but the majority of those have been up here in Crescent City. So I mentioned earlier that we're trying to deal with conflict and at the same time consider habitat management. So just kind of bringing that idea back where we kind of have conflicting management goals, right? So we want to deal with the conflict, reduce numbers, right? But at the same time, figure out a way to have robust populations of elk in areas where they're welcome. It's tough. So how are we dealing with this density issue? How are we reducing numbers? So one way is to increase harvest. Well, we've done that, right? We've increased share numbers, and so we have those tags there, but we don't always have enough properties enrolled to allocate all those tags. The share program also has some limitations when you're looking at places like Crescent City. So it's highly urban. Hunting is not feasible in all of these areas. And there's also a limit on the compensation that we can provide these property owners. So I'll give an example from Humboldt County. We have 2 ranches in Oric that they need more tags, but the department cannot compensate them because they don't have enough acreage because we're maxed out at $30 an acre. So what they're doing is every year they take their standard share tags, so 3 and 2, and then they offer opportunity to general tag holders to start reducing those numbers. But it's a juggle, and so we just need to figure out solutions. We also need to figure out how to deal with elk populations where there isn't sufficient hunting pressure. So not all of our elk groups can be harvested to the extent necessary to decrease density. So moving forward, data-driven management. So basically me going out, counting elk, collecting samples, putting collars on, knowing where the elk are, what they're doing. And these numbers that we're getting, even though everybody always disagrees with the numbers that I come up with, it is the data that is allowing us to move forward. And it's what's increased our share tag allotment. And it's giving us a small opportunity to deal with conflict in urban areas. We're still looking at other options. And so one of those is depredation tags. And could we utilize depredation tags? So currently they're a non-consumptive tag, meaning that the carcass would have to be destroyed. So do we have the capacity to maybe allow our property owners depredation tags with transferring these carcasses for tribal use? In addition, so elk in high densities in areas outside of hunting pressure, we really need to work as a community with the county, with the city, and local municipalities to figure out what we can and cannot do. I know a lot of times, I feel like I answer my phone all the time, but it seems like I don't show up to all the meetings. So jot numbers down and emails. And so I tried to go through and figure out who kind of did what and who you should contact. So if it's a general elk question, that would be me. If you want to know about regulations and policy, so what's going on with that, share tag season change, you can call our statewide elk and pronghorn coordinator, that's Brent Wolf. Victoria Barr is the one that oversees our share and PLM for the state. And so she's the one that actually will write and work with the property owners to initiate share contracts on an annual basis. Emma Lance, she's our wildlife veterinarian that facilitates all the elk work. And then finally, Kiana, she is our unit biologist for Del Norte and Humboldt County. She was, before this year, our conflict specialist. And so she deals with everything furred and feathered now, but she, I think, still has a place in her heart for offering recommendations. Any questions? So it depends on. Yep. So normally, when you estimate wildlife populations, you normally utilize aerial surveys. That is not feasible in any of our area here, right? We can't fly and count. So what we've done along the coast is just getting minimum count data. So we drive around, we know where the collars are, we count what we can see. So historically, we're underestimating the number of bulls because bulls tend to hide more, right, than the large cow groups. When you step away from our coastal elk, from those that you can see from Highway 101 and from driving the ranch roads, we've actually put cameras out and we've done fecal DNA and we've done some clever things to estimate abundance. And we've done that from the Oregon border all the way down through the center of Humboldt County. And so when you kind of add those numbers together, we have a total population probably exceeding 2,500 elk. And so the minimum count data is just a tiny little bit of the population as a whole. CDEC, yes, Crescent Beach Education Center. I did not name them, that was the park that did that. Yep, there's a lot of elk. And so that group was historically more one herd, and they grew in numbers and actually split into 3 subgroups. It looks like, except for the bulls, that most of those cows have kind of come back down towards Elk Valley Rancheria. But yeah, their numbers are high. Yeah.
Have you looked at landowners that have smaller properties that might be able to band those properties together if they're contiguous? Or looked at property owners who have small properties, maybe bordering county, state, or federal lands that would be open?
To share hunting or for landowner tags?
Landowner or share. I mean, you said there's a restriction on the size of property, so could.
So I don't go out and advertise. I mean, unfortunately, I just don't have time to do that. There are concerns about smaller parcels because of the legality of harvest. So there are stipulations with it for the distance. I'm sure someone else can speak to that. At 150 yards. Yeah.
I would think that if there's 2 30-acre parcels next to each other, that you could band those together.
So you can. For a landowner tag, it has to be contiguous acreage, and yes, multiple properties can go in together to achieve the acreage requirement to get a tag.
So that would be kind of on a case-by-case basis?
It is.
Okay. So just
Yeah. So currently, our PLMs are maxed out for the state. So that is written within our environmental document. So in order to allocate more PLM tags, we would need to either have a supplemental environmental document or a whole new one, in addition to commission approval to proceed with new PLMs. So the department isn't the entity that basically authorizes the PLMs. It's the commission. That would be a question for Mario.
If you speak loudly,
There's a difference in the PLM, the landowner, and the share program.
sorry, I think there's a microphone someplace. I keep forgetting to, here we go.
You gotta be, I'll just stand here. There's some nuances in PLM, share, landowner tags, and how that plays out. And so I think it's important to recognize that in some of the areas we're talking about here, PLM has different requirements for the landowner to actually incentivize the animals to be on their property. And so you're enrolling in those programs saying that I'm doing wildlife friendly and habitat improvements, and I'm creating these opportunities to bring wildlife on, and you're incentivized through that process. All of the conversations we've been having to date are with people who do not want to have more animals on their property and are not really interested in incentivizing it. So we are willing to look into opportunities, increasing PLM opportunities. And if that's the environmental documents we need to review, we can look into that. It's a process, like everything we've talked about today, unfortunately. But that hasn't been in our space. And what we were trying to do was to increase the opportunity for landowners and for share program. And that's where we talk about the 60 acres, where previously it was 640. And it wasn't until last year that we went to the commission and got that opportunity to create what's called, you all are living in a conflict zone, which allowed us to drop that requirement to 60 acres to enroll, and it made it more property owners eligible. And that got down to some scrutiny as well because of the same things. It's more about the safety and what is a reasonable amount of space for somebody to come out and fire a rifle. Essentially, it's really what it comes down to. What feels comfortable with neighbors, with the landscape, and how that plays out, of how small of a allotment or a landowner space could you actually create to where folks could safely take an animal in that space. So we've been trying to do everything we can to increase these opportunities for landowners and share, as you saw on the slides, and those numbers that are going up. What we're seeing now, and this I think will be our test this year, just because of the way the timing works, the test this year will be to see, are we even fulfilling the amount of tags we have? I think the number was 70 that were underutilized. They did not get utilized. That's 70 animals we did not take off the landscape, and somebody didn't have an opportunity to harvest. So that's what our goal is right now, is trying to create those opportunities. And the conversation we had previous to this meeting with the share folks, which was really about how do we incentivize that and educate more people about the opportunities, about these programs, talk to them about the timelines you have to meet to enroll, get your paperwork in. We go through our process and then get into the program when it's the season that the commission's approved. So there's all kinds of timing things, and I think we had some great discussion today about how do we do that better? How do we educate you all? How do we share the knowledge that landowners who are in the program have with others? How do we walk people through the process? It's not that complicated, but it's not nothing. I mean, you have to, fill things out. You got to submit information, and you got to know about your properties and find some documents and stuff. So it's a little bit of that, but we're happy to look into that space if we had folks that are interested in, enrolling in PLMs and working through that program. But that just, so far, that hasn't been necessarily our focus in these conversations.
Private land wanted to deal in today, you couldn't. Yeah, currently
Correct.
based on the question, place, conversation. Years, Humboldt and Dillon. That's been the same. Not this cap. That's a willingness. to Pursue increasing that as a so my hope would be and their management, that they have access to that program, and that you as staff could report back to those at large, that at least here in Humboldt and Del Norte, there's those that are interested in pursuing that.
We
once the ER
can,
is done.
yeah, I can make that commitment today that we'll look into it. I've been in this chair for 3 years. I haven't heard that yet, but I'm happy to have that conversation. We meet pretty regularly with the hunting community and a lot of the NGOs in that space. I don't know, it's every quarter, I think, and then we always hear from them in the Wildlife Resource Committee and the commission process. So happy to look into that. I'll work with Mario and Scott and see if we can figure out what needs to happen there and where that interest might be. And I'll tell you that it would be a conversation that's probably going to fall into the Wildlife Resource Committee arena to have those discussions in more of a public forum. That's kind of another way for us to easily have already calendared, already scheduled opportunities to talk to the public and introduce ideas. So I'm happy to look into that and see where we're at. That's a program that I think is great. I respect and appreciate the landowners that have this land and that are working hard to sort of co-manage and have range land that's available for wildlife, and they're doing the things they can to live together, if you will, on the landscape. So I think it's great, and I'm very vocal in the programs and the folks that we do work with and how they're managing and the things they're doing, whether they're putting in guzzlers or wildlife-friendly fencing like we talked about, booking brush piles, creating, they're just doing different management aspects on their property to support wildlife along with whatever it is that they're raising on their lands.
And to be fair, Frank, I think that's why Del Norte County several years ago, in having these coordinated meetings with the department, actually into the elk management plan expressed that as a management tool, so the department could pursue it in the future. And it just doesn't seem like that has now occurred, even though we worked hard as a county to express that opinion in that elk management plan. So.
Yeah, comment noted. Thank you. Yeah, great.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
You may have
How did I get
been
the mic?
talking
What
about this. I
happened?
have a hard time. I'm really hard of hearing, so. So I get the share program and issuing tags, but just briefly for my own sanity, what is, why isn't trapping a substantial amount of the herd, holding them, testing them, and then releasing them somewhere else in some other state a viable option? Just real quick, so it's probably not popular or whatever, but.
Actually, part of your question is what I've asked several times, and it's really about trying to understand the disease of these animals. Part of your question I've asked when I've met with my staff as well, and it's trying to understand the disease aspect of these animals. And so if I hear your question right, it's like, why can't we go wrangle up 50 elk, hold them somewhere while we test them, determine if they're positive, and move them somewhere? I will not say to another state, but somewhere else, potentially relocate. We do this with other species, et cetera. It's my understanding, and I'm looking over here to y'all, but it's not, the testing process, as Carrington just shared with you, is not simple and super easy. There's a huge labor and intensive, need of resources to do that, as well as where to hold them. We relocate animals. We move them pretty regularly to try to increase herds in other areas. So we've got that ability. It is a pretty cool rodeo, I'll call it, of intense resources of what it takes to helicopter, to get them, to mug them, to get them, to hold them, to move them, to transport them, and the staff and the vet time and the stuff that's there. The disease has been the issue that we've found, and I don't think anybody in this room that wants animals that have disease to be moved around into another neighborhood. And I think that's been the biggest hurdle, is how to figure that out, as well as just the resources. I mean, you can see that there's a lot of people here today, but there's only about 2 people over there that are spending every single day that are afforded the time to spend on this issue and work on these animals. We're all here trying to help solve some issues, but this is not our day job. But it's something we've been talking about, very difficult to implement.
Yeah, I understand it's a huge financial output. We don't have the money to do it, I'm sure of that.
I thought you were going to tell me you guys got some funds and you want to co-match and do something else.
No, logistically, it's probably impossible to find a piece of land and put a 12-foot fence around it, because they'll just jump over it,
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
And then feed and
use the
and
county fair or
the
rodeo and hold them for a while.
biology for it is probably out there.
Anything else on that?
Thank you.
Yeah, we currently don't have a test for TAD, except for dead elk, right? We have to have them dead. We are working on a test currently with Washington, utilizing swabs and PCR to find the disease on live elk. So that could open up some windows in the future. The other thing is that we're more supportive of opening up habitat and allowing elk to naturally move and have their own range expansion without it artificially being done by the department. So we're currently moving Thule elk, but that's specifically to deal with genetics statewide. And so we don't have that issue with Roosevelt elk here on the coast.
And that is another topic that we didn't discuss a whole lot today. It's something that's been on my mind, and when I sit in Sacramento with access to sort of our grant programs and different resources we have when bond funds do come in or other supplemental funds become available, or we meet with our NGO partners that have, grant programs or opportunities, or even the federal partners. So it's about, and that's about land management, right? And that's sort of looking at what can we do on the landscape that maybe moves the elk around or gives opportunities for them to move. And if you can think about it in a combination of, if we're creating the right habitat in areas, or maybe it's not perfect habitat compared to some of your fields that you have out here because y'all are managing it in a certain way, but we can work through fencing, we can work through management, and you can take all of those ideas together. You can start to sort of move the herds around to where we more maybe want them, or there's more PLM opportunities where properties are, we're managing that property, and it's okay. We want elk there, that's fine, but we don't want them over here. So if we can, in combination, figure out how we're working through some of those areas, that may relieve some of the pressure. I think it's an all hands on deck, and it's every tool in the toolbox kind of approach. And so we're trying to think these through just the same as you. You can see that some of the ones we've taken take a long time, but we're moving, we're getting there, and we're always willing to sort of explore options and just know that you're not going to see that on the ground tomorrow. And I get the frustration there. And so some of these things that we want to do just take a little longer, and we're steady fast at it. We're not always talking to you every day, but it's churning in the background.
I think one of the things to remember, and it was discussed somewhat briefly, and it showed a little bit in the presentation, that we've been putting up with these things for a long time. And there's been very little, until pretty recently, very little push from the department to try to get rid of the damn things, pardon my Greek. Because we got a gentleman here who had a nice business, and we visited him today. Dutch Gardner, he's out of business because of the elk. He's out of business because of the elk. You can't, and so it has created big issues, and it's finally beginning to generate the groundswell in Sacramento to try to do what's required to reduce the populations. And the hoof rot system is a problem. I mean, it's a big problem. And one of the things I was hoping to get, and maybe you have it, Carrington, I'm looking to try to see where the numbers of hoof rot removal have been and where the concentration is. Because concentration in specific locations of removal because of bad hoof rot points towards possibly concentration of elk, transmitting it from one to the other, to the other, to the other, and you continue to get more and more and more problem as opposed to trying to eliminate in a highly concentrated area, elk. I mean, there weren't many elk here 40 years ago. I mean, they were here years ago, 200 years ago, but 40 years ago, there weren't very many elk. And there's a lot now. And Carrington realizes there's a lot more than she sees here. And we've been saying that for a long time, and we're just wanting the department to do something about them, right? And many of the people here want the department to try to do something about it. And we're on a path, as you mentioned. We're slowly getting there. Do you by chance have those numbers, Carrington, about specific herds or specific locations of how many have actually been removed because of hoof rot?
Not exactly. I printed a map for you, Rob.
Not exactly.
I didn't do numbers. I thought you wanted a map.
Well, I want numbers.
Oh, I don't have numbers. Do you want that?
You'll get us numbers, won't you?
I can give you numbers, yes.
Yes.
Helen, have I shared it with you?
What's that?
I shared it with you?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
That's what I was just going to say. Carrington said, I want to see, last December. Okay, Camp Lincoln in 23-24 was 11. Whatever CBEC is, there was 1. Jordan Creek, there was 2. Tallowa Dunes, there was 33 in 2021. 32 in 2022, 21 in 22-23, 18 in 23-24, for a total of 104 removed from the Tallowa Dunes herd. That would be the PLM. And then you've taken a few off, you said, this year.
That points towards a problem, doesn't it? Concentration and transmission. And I mean, it does. And so that's some place to look at really seriously, because all of the other areas have it, but not at the types of numbers and the quantities and the volume that it has there. And so, I mean, I think that's a very, very, very important thing to concentrate on.
Understood.
I don't know what other folks think.
Is it possible that to lower the lake levels and dry out the grasslands around Wallowa and the dunes some, would that help with the biology and the transmission?
From that standpoint, I don't think so. But I know where you're going with that, so
Lots of luck.
I won't go down that pathway tonight.
I do have a couple of things. You brought up the ballistics of high-powered rifles. Is that the only method of take allowed?
No. There's opportunities there.
Okay, for bows.
Yeah, correct.
What about shotguns? They don't have the same distance
Slugs.
issue. Slug.
Standard
shotguns,
methods that are used
you
that
could
are called
use
out
that
in code.
in higher density areas of people.
Yeah. There's
Okay?
still some, I mean, like I said, when we first brought this up in the resource committee and through the commission when we were first, last year when we were going through this, I'll just tell you, there was concerns that were brought up when we were trying to navigate a safe space in some of that area. And some parties were disinterested in participating and thinking about that because there was fear of some concerns with just the size. And so I'll just leave it at that, but recognize that we've talked about all of those things. One thing that I said earlier, and I'll say again here, same with the SHARE program, when we're looking for folks that want to enroll and there's some concern, because I get it, this is private land that you're letting somebody onto your property. I get it. Like, it's your backyard, and you're like gonna just let some random person come hunting. There's also allowances for you to sort of dictate how that happens. Method of take is one of those. We constantly, and for the first time, I think, Scott, thank you to your credit, we're gonna offer some elk opportunities with a bow. With the bow, we've been hammered by the Bowmen's Association for years about having not enough opportunities for bow hunters to take elk. We've increased those opportunities, and some of that's through there. Share is another place where you can. That's a requirement you put if you enroll. This is how the method to take is on my property. So there's some allowances for you, for folks that are interested in thinking about getting into those programs to help eliminate some of the issues they're doing, but are a little cautious about who's in their backyard and how that plays out. What days do they hunt? Who do they hunt with? Do you have to be there, or do you need to have a guide with you? There's certain things that you can work with our program and talk about and think about how you might want to enroll in the program.
And I have one other concern here. I got kind of disturbed when you said a depredation, they would actually destroy the carcass. That's wanton waste.
That's part of the reason that we've been trying to do everything we can before, the department can issue depredation permits. We've been trying to do everything we can. We know this is a highly, sought after animal. We know it has a great value to people, to hunters, to just food in people's freezer and on their table. And when you go the depredation route, that's a code. That's in code. That's not something we can change.
Yes, you can.
Well, we can. We can. I'm sorry, the process, the department itself can't. That takes that's enacted legislation. You got to move through that, and I'll just leave it there. But it is a requirement that's part of that, is that can't be, you cannot retain that animal, and so it needs to be disposed of. And that's something that we've been trying to avoid through all of these conversations we're having, is figuring out a way where it's a win for a lot of people. It's a win for the landowner. It's a win for the hunter. It's a win for just the resource, that we're trying to have in the state and make available to people.
Well, the public here has been impacted negatively by a lot of these. I've lost a couple of apple trees, not to mention my granddaughter on her first decent car got it totaled.
Sorry to hear that.
That was the Tolowa herd. Okay. You've got all these animals that are being killed. What, 140? Is it? Yeah, for the removal. I don't understand why you don't get a permit. People will pay you money to take these. I understand the meat is fine in it. We had a presentation from a lady up in Washington about it. So why is that not incentivized? You could have a list of people, you give them a call, we have an animal, we need to get taken down.
There's quite a few reasons for that. One of it, we're on private land, but the other one is these animals that we're identifying. We're specifically identifying animals that are the sick ones or the lame ones out of a herd. And it's our responsibility as an agency to deal with public welfare and safety animals. And so we take that responsibility very seriously. And instead of, hoping that a hunter gets the right one, we have multiple biologists, multiple biologist staff and a warden out there making sure that we have the exact animal targeted and removed from the herd so that we're not impacting non-clinical animals.
Well, you would take them out and show them the animal that needs to be removed. I just don't understand why you're not using this as a moneymaker for the department.
I would just say a good point to this is I've been putting in for elk for 18 years, and hopefully one day I get drawn. We would not, as an agency, want to tell a hunter, hey, target the sick one. So hunters put in their time, put in their tags. Us as an agency, we're not going to tell them to target a limping animal. This is their once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
They'd be aware of that.
Sure.
This is a different hunt.
Yeah, no,
Separate from
for
the
us, I think Jeff said it pretty clearly. This is a management action that needs to be conducted by the department.
Failing that, the meat only goes to the tribes, right?
Correct. I was going to say that those animals that are removed for that are being used and harvested, and they're used for the
I
tribes.
spent too much time in Alaska.
We're working with the
The
tribes in that
resources
space.
shared with everybody there. We're the people being impacted by this, so we get nothing from it other than dead cars, trees removed. You understand?
Understand, yeah. And again, just back to the point of most of these removals, if not all of them, but most of them are private land. So opportunities are a little different in that space, but we can take back and look at how much more flexibility there may be in the law that allows that animal to go somewhere else. Right now, it's been pretty clear that it's allowed with tribes. I don't know if food banks or anything in that space. I think it's just tribes. So again, there's a little bit of restriction, and we're trying to blend in the gray area and do what we can, but that's what we're here to have some conversation around, explore some new ideas, and think about, things that we maybe weren't paying attention to or didn't notice, and just think about opportunities. So I'll take that back, and we'll continue to think about it.
Does the department have
Hold it,
any
Frank.
kind of program to
Oh.
assist landowners to get help with elk-proof fencing?
I mean,
So we don't have a program for compensation. We have recommendations that are outlined within our management plan.
Yeah, you have a program to financially help people get elk-proof?
So can I just say something really fast? The people at home, this is such a valuable conversation. They cannot hear when questions are asked from the audience. So if you could just remember to speak into a mic.
The reason I bring that up is because, Del Norte County, we need economic help, obviously. And we have certain businesses like Keese's, the Blueberry Farm. Some of them are relatively small areas, but they're heavily impacted by elk. And it would be a relatively simple thing if they could put an elk-proof fence up, but it's financially difficult. If the department had a program that said, well, we'll help pay for half it, whatever, and try to allocate some monies to try to help people get elk-proof fencing up, it would really help us economically with small businesses like that.
I appreciate the comment, and respond to you. We've tried to do some of this in the past. And we talked about this earlier too as well. There's opportunities in the NGO world like Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and others, but it's targeting wildlife-friendly fencing, not exclusionary fencing. And so most of that typically falls on the landowners. The state does not have a program to fund that. We can help people. We can talk to you about what would work and what's a good design, but we don't have the department and no state agencies that I know of have funding for that. We have in the past, through active folks in the legislature and other places, received similar opportunities in the wolf space, where we've actually had incentive programs, compensation programs that's paid for ranchers to help deal with depredation events from wolves. And that's not something that we get. That's decided by the legislature or the governor's office. Somebody puts that through and it ends up here, and we ended up putting it out as a grant program. We don't have a fund source for that type of activity. We have worked with parties to implement wildlife-friendly fencing, which again doesn't necessarily solve the total issue of an animal. If you're a farmer that can't have the animal on the landscape at all, that's just total detriment to your lifestyle, then that's not going to work. But for ranchers that maybe have the issue where the elk are continuing to just rip up your fences, maybe a wildlife-friendly fencing is the right route for you to go, and you can live with the fact that the elk are going to share some of your landscape with your cattle or whatever else you might have. So it's really kind of a unique situation for each individual. And sizing. I mean, some of these ranches we're driving around today, we know they're huge. And fencing them is just super expensive if you're going to do exclusionary fencing. We get that too. So I think Jeff might have some more info, but.
The wolf funding that we work with, it provides funding to the ranchers in order for them to live with the wolves. It's actually not funding them to exclude the wolves off their properties. So it helps, keep them away from cattle and other things, but even the wolf funding that we have to deal with the wolves on private landowners is not really, it's meant to compensate, but it's because they are having the wolves on their properties and on their landscape. And so it is really hard, just in addition, that was special funding, but in addition, it's even harder for us to find money as a wildlife agency to just exclude wildlife.
Yeah, it's a fair point. It's not exactly exclusionary fencing like you're thinking about, 10 foot tall and it's shaped on one side and what have you. It's more of like flaggery, electrified exclusion from that standpoint. I mean, a wolf could still get through or cow, what have you, but it's not full 100% exclusion like I think you're mentioning.
And in regards to compensation, other states have developed programs where there is compensation for having elk on the landscape, but the money that is being allocated to these properties is not enough to fully deal with the issue. It doesn't compensate for the broken fences. It really doesn't compensate for the forage loss. It is a very small amount of money, and it's being done outside of the state agency itself.
There's a lot, as those of you who have driven around in Smith River, there's a lot of elk exclusionary fencing that you can see from the road. I mean, it is possible to keep them out. And it's not cheap, but it is possible to eliminate them because they can be trained. If they have a passageway where they go through constantly, they can be trained not to go there anymore. It takes some effort, and it takes, I've got a guy that every single solitary day, that's what he does. He goes and checks the elk fence. And it requires effort. If you can put up an elk fence, you can put up the electric, whatever, but if you don't ever check it and the wind blows, they're gonna come through. It's not easy, it's not cheap, but it's possible to retrain them off the property. Anyone else have a question?
How could we raise the capital process?
Talk to your legislators.
It is in Fish and Game Code, so it's not up to the department. It's, active legislation.
I think I'm right when I say this, and correct me if I misunderstood on our earlier conversation, but the share properties are paid a fee based upon acreage, and it's the $30 an acre fee. And based on acreage, you can be allocated a certain number of tags and a certain amount of money. Doesn't necessarily mean that if you could choose to get more tags for no money. So if you have a property where you've got 5 tags and you've got a share property as an example and so forth, and you're going to get paid X number of dollars, you could choose to request more tags for no money. That's an important thing that's needs to get passed around, because that's how we need to get all the tags used. Isn't necessarily to get the money, but to get the tags. To get the population down to be a little bit more reasonable, because it's exploded. I remember very well when 42 elk crossed the river at Saxton's tackle shop. Those were the first elk that crossed the river over to go on the south side of the river. Before they had come from the north and they had kind of worked their way in. There weren't very many elk you ever saw south of town or anywhere there, but 42 crossed at Saxton's and they never came back. And 42 are now whatever.
Now, the question I have is, I've been kind of just bouncing this idea around. Now, does the department, in the standpoint, like, can you guys declare like an emergency, considering what we got going on here with the overpopulation, how big these herds are getting, and to maybe increase like our tags or do something to reduce the amount of elk in an emergency standpoint. Once we get to that, then once the elk is reduced, the herds are reduced, then we can start talking about management, because we're talking about management right now. The herds are just super huge and they're hard to manage, and the damage that they're creating is just insane. And so, if the department, instead of trying to go through all this, like, I mean, don't you guys as a department have the authority to declare an emergency to avoid all the red tape and all the loopholes as a temporary to help solve some of this?
You can take it if you want.
Uh-oh, they're whispering.
Well, I don't know. I'll say I don't know, because I don't want to misspeak. Whether that's a possibility for the director or not, I don't know. It's not called out in any code that I'm aware of. It's not part of regulations that I'm aware of. There might be some code that, that lays that out. I don't know. Our efforts were and are to try and work with folks. We have depredation opportunities like we talked about. We could issue depredation permits. Y'all could figure that out. We could work with you. And we could go take a bunch of animals that end up in landfill, I guess, or for lack of a better term, or potentially we work with the tribes if there's interest to sort of spread that around based on the regulations and what we have today. There's also what we call surplus hunts, which is an opportunity. The problem we've faced, again, and this is still up for discussion with all of us, but part of the problems we're facing is we're talking about private land. So opening up surplus hunts and the allowances we have today is, again, back to public lands. And that's not where we're seeing these issues. So we've been focusing, and maybe it's on the wrong space, and that's what we're trying to figure out with you. We've been focusing on landowners, and we've been focusing on share programs, because that's where we have the availability to work with individual landowners to help reduce this conflict. There could be other opportunities. We continually talk about this internally, so I hope that's clear to y'all, especially that I'm able to even talk this long about this issue, that we have a lot of conversations around this. So I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I don't think there's a space there for that under an emergency clause or what have you, unless it was like a public safety issue. We always have that. Your local sheriffs have that ability. But I don't think that's what we're talking about in this space. We're just talking about nuisance, depredation, issues y'all are dealing with. So we can continue to look into some of those options, and I'm happy that I'm hearing some feedback that maybe isn't what we've been thinking about in that space. But that's kind of where we're at right now.
It's very interesting in this county that there's absolutely no desire by the public agencies, Forest Service, National Park, State Park, and in some sense, Fish and Wildlife lands to try to get them rehabilitated. There were, as you all know, there was a whole series of leases at one point on fish and game lands that were taken over by dairy folks and folks who were grazing animals that kept those properties in the productive stage for geese. And the productive stage for geese is basically almost the same productive stage for elk. And those all stopped, and we know why they stopped from a legality standpoint, but they're back. So there needs to be a really strong effort to try to get those leases back and get those lands fixed again.
My understanding is that I don't know about days away, but they're here, they're coming. We've been talking about that internally with our regional folks who manage that, and we are on track to open up some grazing leases again on our land.
Many of them, however, have gone from perfectly grazable land to, I won't say the word, but
that's where I'd like to,
unusable basically for anything.
I'd like to talk about some of that as well. And I know Helen and I had minimal conversations, and there was no way we were going to cram it in today, but I think it is a good opportunity for us, again, broadening the circle of the conversation and talking with our parks partners, talking with our other folks about how we more collectively, on a watershed scale or a county scale, can look at these lands and manage them in collaboration. I agree. I don't think we're doing that. I don't know if we've ever done that, but I think it's something that we can look at and explore with our partners and our sister agencies. There's funding available. So depending on the projects you have, there's bond funds and grant funds, and there's things available. And I'm interested in partnerships with some of our NGOs, with the 501Cs. I know we've been talking about that, and whether there's opportunity to grant money out to either better manage our lands, work with state parks to manage their lands, and try to enhance some of these public lands, at least in the surrounding areas, that maybe helps relieve some pressure because it has those animals moving off of, or giving them more opportunity to be somewhere else other than on private lands. But we've been talking about that as well, and I know there's an interest there. And I've been digging through my conversations with our grants branch about what opportunities are there and what are the qualifications. Every fund pot has a line item you got to meet, right? They all say, well, it can only be for this and only be for this. And we've got to figure out how to find the projects that can fit into the right pots of money and how to bring those together to hopefully look into some of this restoration of these lands that, frankly, I drove around today. I think we all agreed, even our own staff, some of these lands they're unmanaged at the moment, and we could do better. And I think that's what is also on the table for us to be exploring possibilities in the future of how we can continue to look at resolving some of these conflicts.
We're up.
I was just going to say, Pat, that's doing the grazing, he has a packet he said he's putting together, and it was like 243 acres. And 243 acres, it's almost insignificant as far as this elk problem is concerned. It's welcomed. It'll be good for the Aleutian geese, but I don't think it's going to help our elk problem that much.
that was something that was really helpful today to drive around for me personally, just to sort of look at the landscape and you look at, oh, this is so-and-so's land, this is your land, you know, folks telling me this is our land, this is your land, this is their land. And you just look at the scale and you got to sit down and think about it a little bit of like, you're right, is that patchwork really matter? Is that nothing is insignificant, but how significant is it is the question, and how, where do you put your energy and your funds as to a solution that might be actually helpful?
Rob, I'll just start talking. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I think we have a good opportunity here, in particular with the state legislature right now, and I'll make mention that I've had a few conversations with Assemblyman Chris Rogers from our district, who would really like to dive into grazing public lands. He's started this conversation, Marin and Sonoma County in particular, around wildfire, and there could be some synergies there, in particular for our areas to the north, as we begin to address biomass loads within these areas of public land. We're going to need species that could be managed by some of our private landowners to move into these areas to create this shortgrass habitat, as mentioned, that we used to create with the Aleutian Canada goose in mind, but state parks, for instance, it fell out because it was single species management. But moving forward, as a department that does multi-species management, this could be a great tool for us if he could gain traction within the state legislature and find additional support through fire.
That is the creative thinking that we have been exploring and working through as well. We are able to, and we have a wildfire program where the department very active. We're actually probably one of the state leaders, if not the state leader, in managing our lands for wildfire resilience, and have made unbelievable leaps and bounds of how much acreage we have treated in the last 2-3 years that program came into existence with the onslaught of the budget funds and things happened. So we've been exploring some of those options as well, and I think there is opportunity there for us to continue to get creative with what type of restoration. We tend to think of restoration a lot of times in a single focus of like, it's just this and it's just that. And I think what we've been trying to do at the department over the last 3 years is really get creative with what does restoration really mean? Does it really have to be just about that salmon or that bird species or that focal species? And looking at it more holistically, whether you want to call it under 30 by 30 or climate change resilience or whatever you want to do, but really it's about the ecosystem and about how we can fit this project that might have 90% of it benefiting something, but it's 10% or 20 that's benefiting the one focal species or restoration project that was identified in the fund pot. And so we're working on ways to bridge money and work through and find, landowners that are willing, parties that are willing. The department doesn't have the capacity to do a lot of that work. We grant it out most of the time, unless it's on our properties, and even then we grant it out. So we just don't have the staffing and capabilities for a lot of the lands we have, but we've been working through that. What was the bill that just passed this year? Was that just tribal for cultural burning? That's just tribal, but allowing it on our properties now? Yes. So there was some legislation just passed last year. I apologize, I don't have it memorized, but in that same space of trying to allow more opportunities. I thought we had some grazing stuff that went through as well. Yes. That's allowing us to, again, do exactly what you're saying. So I'd like to talk before you run anywhere with that to see if we've already got some of those abilities that you're thinking about that just recently have gone through for us to be able to do that and be able to do it more often under wildfire resilience. But it has multi-benefits, right? So you just got to think about how you're working through all that.
It looks like it's on. There we go. Thinking about this piece of getting into the private land piece, I was thinking about a program they had in Idaho, which was the junior mentor hunts that they have there. Years ago when my kids were younger, I could go over to Idaho, pay full price for my, out-of-state tag and license. But if I had one of my kids there, 12 to up to 18, you pay a very reduced rate for the tag and the license. I think it was like $17 back then. It's 20 years ago. It was really attractive for us to go over and explore Idaho and, let our kids hunt. It was also something that we could get onto private land with, because we were truly trying to mentor our young hunters into a lifetime of hunting there. So it was a way to that a landowner would be a little more attracted. I could totally get just not letting any schmuck onto your land. But if you had a dad and an uncle that had a couple of cousins that were young and trying to explore hunting, we did get onto some private land here and there. So
Yeah.
I didn't know if there was a program that California could look at for this area for that same reason, but it was great for us. I mean, we traveled for many hours to explore that, and were successful. Our kids did great, and it was a great time to be had for the hunter and for the landowner as well.
We currently do have 2 apprentice tags, actually through the PLM program. They're donated by our PLMs, and they're only for apprentice hunters. So we only have 2. So there is the capacity for more of our PLM programs to offer that opportunity if they're willing. We have tried to get more share tags that are apprentice only. Unfortunately, it hasn't gone over very well. So we end up getting hunters that are down in LA with a teenager, and they just don't have the time to make the drive up here and get an elk harvested. The other opportunity we have, these landowner tags, a junior hunter, the cost for that tag is only $25. So I would highly recommend that when you apply for your landowner tag, work with kids in the community and get them involved and get that tag issued to them.
Hello. Hi. Can I ask you a question? I think it's Carrington. When you were giving the presentation about the hoof rot disease, you were saying that it was multi-pronged and you weren't quite sure if it was hereditary or not. That was concerning to me. I didn't know it was such a devastating, sad disease where they starve to death. So I'm more concerned on the piece of how do we prevent that disease? And if it is hereditary, we need to isolate how is it hereditary, right? And try to eliminate, if it's from the males or from the females and stuff like that.
So there might be a genetic component to this disease where some individuals are more susceptible. That is research going on in Washington, and we're years and years out from knowing an answer to that. So in regards what we can do to better manage this disease, it's really focusing on density, right? It's decreasing density in these herds that we know are positive.
Well,
Here we go.
Today, just before we met out there, I was on the phone, and Linda and Rob were there, and I was talking to Margaret. And the thing that I hadn't really heard before, that she said they're not sure if this hoof disease evolved from domestic livestock. So everybody here is pretty smart, so figure it out. If it evolved from the private domestic livestock, what's to keep it from re-entering the domestic livestock? And that is part of the problem. It's the unknown. It's not what is known, it's the unknown. And that is why, speaking for myself here, I am very upset that all of the monitoring has not done and promptly tested. Because if this breaks into our domestic livestock, hard telling where it's going to go. And that's the problem. And I know that there's some comments prepared that Mr. Reed is going to present, and that's one of the things that's in there, is how can anybody sit here and say it's not going to happen? We need to be more concerned about the hoof disease. It's not really called foot rot. And until the best science can guarantee that, it's just not a very good thing.
So that might very well bring Mr. Reed up.
If you're done with me,
You might have to come back,
Oh,
sorry.
I was gonna say, all right.
and I'd certainly like to thank the movement of the microphone with Supervisor Starkey. We appreciate it. Thank you. I'll have to hire a high school kid next time.
If y'all are interested. Good evening. My name's Jeff Reed. I'm here tonight on behalf of the Lake Earl Grange Environmental Policy and Procedures Committee. This may take a few minutes, but I'll try to make it as brief as I can. Fortunately, many of the things that were on our list to bring to the commissioners tonight and to the department have been talked about, and we're very appreciative of that there's a back and forth conversation with everyone, because that helps all of us, no matter what our opinions or whatever are. So we thank all of you folks for coming, whether it's from Eureka, Redding, or Sacramento. We appreciate you being up here, and you picked a beautiful day. We haven't had too many of those lately. As always, our county residents are willing to collaborate with the department to develop solutions that benefit all parties. However, enough is enough. Working on it is no longer an acceptable response. The situation that we're in right now is unacceptable. Data has been lost, suppressed, and disregarded, and state staff does not always follow through on test reports and recommendations. Local staff have given recommendations and data up through the upper management through the chain of command, and that have not always gotten where it was supposed to go, is our understanding. Staff needs to be held accountable for if that information gets from the field up to the offices and can be put to good use. Communication must improve at all the department levels in partnership with local stakeholders. I won't go too much into the meat of this because a lot of it has been discussed, but it is important to recognize that when the department created the elk management plan a few years back, the primary goals were maintaining elk herds, protecting habitat, reducing damage, addressing public health and safety concerns, and providing recreational opportunities. Additionally, the department was supposed to update the local management plan for the Lake Earl Wildlife Area, which expired 22 years ago, to include support, to ensure that it included support for conservation efforts for Aleutian geese, elk, and other species around Lake Earl. No updates to that management plan has been made in the last 20 so years. We are also aware that the state park here, Tolowa Dunes State Park, doesn't have an official management plan as far as we know. And there's an obvious need for all these things to be integrated. And I think somebody mentioned the watershed approach to some wildlife management. Not to go back in history too far, but 20 some odd years ago, I stood out at the Narrows at Lake Tolowa with the state park director, a lawyer or two from the Lands Commission, and a few other folks. And that was my emphasis to them that day, standing out there at the Narrows on Lake Tolowa. There's all this public land here, and it has to be managed together for the benefit of the people that live here, the people that don't live here, the resources, the wildlife, and so on and so forth. And it's gladdening to hear that the department has for some time tried to work with the other state agencies in the National Resources Division, but also the state parks and the national park. I work for the national park. They're not the easiest people to, I won't say work with, but to talk to get a movement forward to where we need to go for the resources, which are what's important. 20 years ago, the Del Norte Farm Bureau, the Lake Earl Grange, and private property owners brought many of these issues to the state. Some of those did not make it very far due to employees retiring or moving on. And this is just one of several things that has cautioned us to believe that the message is not going up the chain. And it's an administrative issue, it's a bureaucracy issue, whatever you want to call it. But it needs to be fixed and it needs to be taken care of. And we recognize that all of you coming here tonight and hearing these concerns hopefully will further progress along those channels of communication, because that's what's important. You know, if we feel left out, then we take things the wrong way. It's just human nature. It's not always correct, but it is how it is. There have been 2 official elk stakeholder meetings in Del Norte County in the past several years, and that's a good thing, but the last one up until today was held 2 years ago. So there's this problem that we've all discussed over and over here for the last hour and a half or so. It's not anything new at all to the folks that live here and the folks whose income and welfare depend on that, as well as for the safety of the general public depend on that. So it's important that some of these things get addressed. I won't go through everything that Carrington talked about as far as the TAD and the diseases and all of that, because I'm definitely not qualified to do that. She gave a very great example of the potential downside to these diseases. So let me give you a few examples of what we see outside of the disease issues. Extensive damage to ranch fences, allowing elk on public roadways, domestic livestock damages, broken legs and being gored, threats of disease, harassing and running cattle through fencing, concerns for rising insurance liability. If the elk cause a serious problem on private land, who is responsible at the end of the day? Is it the landowner? Is it the department? It's the elk that are responsible, but what can you do with them when it's a monetary thing involved? And the non-agricultural land areas, there are gored horses, broken legs on backyard butcher steers, mounting and penetrating backyard horses, there are car versus elk versus fences versus people issues, and then things like destroying swing sets and trampolines and stuff like that. So it's heartening to see that the health information was a big part of your presentation tonight, because we feel that oftentimes that health information isn't getting out to the public. The landowners to some degree are more than aware of it, but the rest of the community is not, in our estimation. So again, it's incumbent on the processes in the Bureau to get that information out with whatever clarity you can have for that. I don't want to skip a whole page, even though you probably wish I would. To jump to the heart of the matter, which is the hoof disease. The Alexander PLM has become a foot disease hotbox. The PLM program was approved without sufficient disease research being conducted. Stakeholders are deeply disappointed when private and organizational comments regarding the PLM were suppressed for the proposed implementation of the plan at the Region 1 office and never presented to the Fish and Game Commission. As a result, the Alexander PLM was approved without full consideration of public concerns. Afterwards, the department sent a letter of apology from Rick Callis acknowledging they had dropped the ball, but those concerns have not been adequately addressed since then. And this meeting will certainly help with that, help address those concerns. This lost historic grazing for elk. I think it's been talked about enough to how the public lands have changed in this county in the last 60 years. So I won't rehash all those issues, but for those of us that have lived here very long, it's perfectly obvious why the elk go where they go. That's the same reason the Aleutian geese went to where they went up until about 2004. Lush, beautiful grass. How could you turn that down? It's easy to get to. Nothing out there is going to bother you. Another concern of the Grange is that the elk are seen as problematic invasive species, which is a non-native plant, animal, or microbe that harms the environment, the economy, or human health. It can cause conflict and competition with livestock, spread disease, or disrupt ecosystems. Unlike invasive species, they are not non-native, but still require management to prevent harm. Once again, that definition fits the elk scenario in this county, as they were removed for whatever reason, by whatever means, and then reintroduced without the forward-thinking portion of that objective, realizing that the land management here had changed since they were last here naturally. And that's where the management of the elk comes into play, because it's required, because humans live here, we're not going away, It's not 1940, and certainly not 1840. So, moving forward, which is, I hope, the most important thing we can talk about tonight. Regarding tribal management, we would like to see and review tribal elk MOUs and contracts. Additionally, tribal elk management plans should be considered as these plans may influence or impact our private lands. This cooperative management sharing helps everyone and it helps the resource. And this was alluded to earlier, and it is important that we're managing, you all are managing a herd that doesn't care whose property they're on. You know, so everyone that's affected by that, whether they're property owners or residents or visitors, you know, has a vested interest in the best management of that herd, and it's across all those boundary lines. And it's important to keep that perspective. Management considerations. I'm getting close to the end. Population reduction efforts to control overpopulation are very important. But so is ensuring herd health through proper monitoring and disease prevention. So we have a few solutions or suggestions to help solve some of this problem, some of which has been talked about, and I won't go into these in great detail, but the handouts I gave to the commissioners include some details, and like I said, I'd be happy to share that with all of you. Number one, reduce the population, which is around 1,000 elk, more or less, to half or less department by department culling. And it may be the harsh truth. I'm not saying it is, but sometimes the harsh truth is you do what you need to do. There's a reason we have an almost unlimited spring snow goose season, and it's to reduce the population. A lot of other things have been tried, and the most effective thing, unfortunately, sometimes is to remove the animal. And it may not be the best long-term solution, but in the short term, you do what you need to do. Extreme or entire culling of the Tolowa herd residing in the Alexander PLM due to it being a hot box situation for hoof disease with no solution in mind is a possibility. It may not be a happy possibility, but if we're talking about reducing the herd, again, you need to do what you need to do and what you can do. And granted, there's restrictions on some of this. We all get that. But the problem is, how long do we wait for the bureaucracy, which is not you folks necessarily, but that bigger bureaucracy that says we have to move at a snail's pace to fix everything. In the meantime, the problem grows and grows. So it's a tough nut to crack, but sometimes you do what you have to do. Also, the department should possibly cull another 200 plus elk from conflict areas throughout the county. As was previously mentioned, more hunting tags can be allocated, but there doesn't seem to be much assurance that more hunting tags are actually going to solve the problem or slow it down very significantly. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the appearance from what we've heard tonight and seen in the past. So it is perhaps time for a little more drastic action. If, through government agency cooperation that was previously discussed, the carrying capacity of the public lands could be enhanced to lure the elk over there, to retrain them, whatever term you want to use, and lessen the impact on the private lands, that would be a great thing. It's somewhat of a pipe dream. I'd be willing to admit that as a National Park Service former employee, but anything's possible with the right motivation, as my boss used to tell me. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. The effort for more tags is actually too little, too late, but it's progress forward, however slow. Expanding the share program, as was talked about, is a good objective as well. But this long list of things here need to be looked at holistically and together so that there's actual advancement on reducing the problem. Depredation permits were mentioned several times, and we would agree that they should be on the table as necessary, as required, and be able to be handled at the local level. By the time you make 14 phone calls, write 5 letters, and try to find funding to do something, the problem has just gotten worse. So, to the final comment. We're all lucky. This terrible situation has evolved over 20 plus years, with the department having been notified even back then. Stakeholders have persistently alerted the department over this time frame, with no significant effort to solve the problem. There has been considerable effort to understand the problem, and that is very appreciated. But we need to go from that stage or continue that stage and get to the next level of what are we going to do to solve the problem. And we think we all in the community are more than willing to help the department with those efforts to whatever our abilities are. And I can't speak for the commissioners or the county folks here tonight, but I would suspect that they would be more than happy to work with the department, as has been expressed within this effort. Excuse me. Even after developing the elk management plan, which I talked about earlier and you're all familiar with, the county is still under revolving issues with the plan. The time has come for immediate action by the department. It cannot continue to allow elk to suffer. Our citizens endure economic loss and the harvesting of diseased elk. And there are many folks that, quite frankly, are not certain that this diseased meat should be eaten. There's, like every scientific endeavor, there's possibilities on all sides. And if you include the extensive damage and the health and public safety issues, again, it's a problem that needs solving and needs solving soon. And again, I'd like to thank all of you for coming out of town to hear the local comments on this, and thank the commission and the supervisors that are here. Thanks. I have another comment on another topic when you're all done with this, and it will be brief.
Oh, another one?
That's why I'm here.
Hey, Jeff, I see here, and I just want to emphasize this, that if you take a look as you come down off of Crescent Hill today, or flew over, and we're in the middle of God's country, and it's pretty beautiful, but right now, only approximately 15% of the land in this county belongs to private citizenship. The rest is either U.S. Forest Service, National Parks, State Parks, Fish and Game. So what that presents us with, all of our elk problem right now, for the most part, and you could kind of see that today on the tour, the lion's share of their forage is on private property. And I think, you kind of look at the wide open spaces here, but the elk, they have definitely migrated to the better pastures. And so with that thought in mind, we don't have all of this property in this county available for the elk. And so if we can't do something, and already I heard from people in Humboldt County at one of the meetings, I think maybe Sean, you might have been there. I think they said it came from that meeting where the Parks Department's philosophy was more habitat, more elk. And that, I think that's the people that was at that meeting told me. I could be wrong, but that's definitely what was told to me. And that's true. You can't very well argue with that. But at the same time, we cannot, as private citizens, continue to feed these animals, and it's only going to get worse. So that's something to kind of consider in the management aspect.
Well, it's about time that we adjourn the meeting, but I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and I think everybody's on the same page. Everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows there's a problem. Everybody has seen the problem. Everybody's going to work on trying to develop what is required to fix the problem. And that's all we can ask. That's all we can ask.
I've been coming to these meetings for the last 10, 12 years. Almost.
Hang on. You got to have a mic. This is important.
Yeah, I'm the Dutch gardener, live close to the casino. We closed the business this year, or actually last August, partly because of the elk, partly because we were just tired. We've been coming to these meetings many years now. Almost didn't come this year because why? Things don't seem to change. There's more elk, more elk, more elk. So what's the use of having these meetings? I mean, it doesn't change. I don't know. we're talking and talking and talking and, put some more radio collars on the elk. I guess they're going to put radio collars on the elk so we can put warning signs on the highway so people don't get killed. But it doesn't fix the problem.
Well, in my view, we've got the pleasure of having some really high-powered folks from Sacramento here that haven't been here before, basically. And they're aware of the situation, they're aware of the public comment, they know the problem, they can see the problem. And I think there's going to begin to be some additional tags, some additional harvesting, some issues with hoof rot, which has to get fixed. I mean, that when you see those animals and those hoof issues, and how much suffering, that's bad. That's bad. And it's progressing in various places throughout the western United States. And so I think we're on a path. We just have to continue. And it's been 20 years. I hope it's not 20 more, but we're on a path to try to get it fixed because the population has to go down. Down. Anybody else have any questions? Comments? Oh, golly. It's our friend Jeff back again. You're talking about elk, right?
No.
I knew that.
Oh, I did bring you some forms for y'all. This will be rather quick. And again, I'm appreciative of all the staff being here tonight. Again, my name's Jeff Reed. For this presentation, I'm here on behalf of the 192 members of the Del Norte Waterfowlers. Given the possibility of a new or revised draft Lake Earl Wildlife Area Management Plan coming forth from the department soon, which I think means in about 2 years or so, I'd like to suggest to this advisory commission and to the county and the county supervisors here tonight to provide input while the plan is being developed. I would also suggest to the department that a few areas of focus during plan development and stakeholder interaction should be on how the last 45 years of state management have specifically enhanced or diminished wildlife populations, fish populations, and water quality on the wildlife area. For example, from the 1975 CDFW Natural Resources Assessment on the Lake Earl area before it was purchased, I have a few comments from that assessment. Water bird census conducted over a 3-year period indicate an average annual use of almost 3 million bird days on Lake Earl. Waterfowl use days average 1.7 million annually, with 90% of those days occurring September through April. That's an important number from a long time ago. According to the Wildlife Conservation Board records from 1982, Lake Earl supports the largest wintering population of canvasback north of San Francisco Bay. Can we still assume that that is true? Has any sort of water bird census been done in the last 25 years? Have management corrections been made if needed? We don't know the answers to these questions, and that's why I'm here asking them. Lake Earl also supports, the assessment went on, at least 14 species of fish, including the king and silver salmon, coastal cutthroat, and rainbow trout. Has any sort of fish population studies been done in the last 25 years? Has anyone seen a salmon in Lake Earl or its associated creeks and streams in the last 25 years? Have management corrections been made if needed? Continuing on in that same assessment, the dense growth of aquatic vegetation and emergent marsh plants makes Lake Earl particularly important for many kinds of water-associated birds that migrate through and winter along the North California coast. During the summer months and early fall, submerged vegetation becomes so dense that powered boating is difficult. These aren't my words, these are the department's words back in the 70s. These are my words now. Given that there has been a significant die-off of submerged aquatic vegetation in Lake Earl in the last 8 years, have any submerged aquatic vegetation studies been done in the last 25 years? Have management corrections been made if needed? One other interesting note, which is a recommendation from that 1975 assessment. Recommendation number 4, no project should be permitted which would alter the water level or characteristic of Lake Earl in a manner adversely affecting fish and wildlife. Given that the breaching regimen has changed significantly over the last 45 years, have any studies been done to determine how the current regimen of breaching near the 10-foot lake level is affecting fish and wildlife and water quality? We'd like to see them if they exist. Before the department took over Lake Earl, the lake was commonly breached between 4 and 5 feet. That number has doubled in the last 45 years to where it's being breached now. Based on the California Department of Water Resources data, Lake Earl has been tidal, or around 3.5 feet, for almost 50% of the time between 2007 of November of 2007 and January of 2023. That's a long time span. For the years 2014 through 2016, 2018, and 2018 through 2019, it was tidal or at 3 feet for 14 months, 10 months, and 12 months respectively. That's a long time span within 5 years of when that lake was open to the ocean. That experience was not calculated in any of the department's preliminary assessments or in the 1999 Tetra Tech review of conditions on Lake Earl. No one foresaw that those conditions would exist, and that's what exists out there now. At the lake level, tidal or 3.5 feet, the lake is essentially salt water. The salinity of 20 to 33 parts per thousand. That's not a normal salinity for that lake anytime prior to 1980. It's triple, if not quadruple, what the average salinity was back then. So perhaps there's a correlation between the significant loss of submerged aquatic vegetation on the wildlife area and increased saltwater intrusion. Inquiring minds would like to know. And a few quick points from the 1988 Lake Earl Interim Management Plan, talking about canvasback. Until studies, this is part of the monitoring program that was supposedly set up regarding canvasback. Until studies are conducted to determine the most desirable lake level management strategy, monitoring will be confined to monthly readings on water elevations. Census counts by air will be conducted monthly from November through March. Water quality samples will be taken monthly. And this goes back to the earlier comments about the water bird censuses that were done prior to the department taking control of these lands, and have any been done since then. Under monitoring program for wetlands, and I'm almost done, studies need to be completed to determine the most desirable lake level management. That condition actually still exists today. I don't know that, maybe the department knows things we don't, but anyway, waterfowl brood counts will be conducted every 3 years in May. Were any of those monitoring events accomplished, and what were the results? Have any management corrections been made if needed? Under the research component, studies are needed to determine the best lake surface elevation management regime in terms of providing the optimum wetland acreage while maintaining the highest production of desirable submergent aquatic vegetation. Until such studies are completed, lake level management will largely be based on trial and error. There might be a recurring theme here, I don't know. It's late in the day and I'm getting tired, but I'm almost done. I would suggest that by now the department should know exactly what the lake level management goals are and what the level should be. Additionally, they should be actively monitoring those results to see if they are being achieved or need to be adjusted. All of this should be fully shared with stakeholders and the public. The trial and error period should be over for 45 years. After 45 years. Thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate it. I appreciate a little extra time from you. We've all been here too long.
Started out as an elk meeting and finished off with Lake Earl Wildlife. So anybody have any other questions?
I can finish it as an elk meeting.
Here we go.
One real quick thing on our elk herds expanding and exploding is the lady that was mauled by an elk we forgot to mention a few years ago, right in the neighborhood up adjacent to the casino. Something we should pay attention to as well, and that should move us to a sense of urgency too, to control the size of these herds, because she came really close to not being here anymore. So I just wanted to not take away from Jeff's words here, but we do need to move with a sense of urgency when we deal with the elk population here. Thank you.
Definitely. Thank you.
My only comment is I want to make is within the 5th district, especially the area around the casino, Elk Valley, the Dutch Gardner, in that whole area, it's that herd is moved from being a beautiful kind of unique characteristic of Del Norte County to being an infestation. They're damaged in the disease and the destruction that they cause to so many of the areas and so many of the family homes, their farms, their little gardens that they put in that have been decimated to the point they don't even bother planting anymore because they don't survive. The herds come in and graze and destroy anything that they put down in their boxes or even sometimes in their greenhouses. And so, it's definitely outgrown those areas, and especially where residences have within that area, and it's gotten to the problem where it's no longer many of those homes and families have just given up in the process of trying to keep their gardens up.
We had the pleasure today of seeing the herd, and they're not wild animals, are they?
And that's what my concern about is. The local people get nothing from any of this, but we put up with all the headaches.
Anyone else? And if not, we can adjourn, 7:32. Thank you all for coming. I think it was very valuable and very informative.